This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
Significant and protracted
political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. It has been nearly 2 years since the Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion, overturning Roe v. Wade and its Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision. Since then, several states have instituted their own abortion policies, most of the time restricting the practice. Several elections also have shown to what extent reproductive rights affects the political outcome. Amanda Becker of the 19th News has chronicled these topics and more, particularly with her forthcoming book, You Must Stand Up, The Fight for Abortion Rights in Post-Dobbs America, and is back on Political Theater to discuss her work and projects. Amanda Becker, distinguished alumna.
That's right.
Of Roll Call. Welcome back to Political Theater.
Thanks for having me.
First, let's do the shameless plug on the book.
Yes.
The
plug away.
September 10th.
Yep.
The book comes out. And you are, I think, currently your own voice actress.
I am. As of now, I'm going to be recording the audiobook in the next couple of weeks. So can't talk too much today, Jason. Need to save my voice.
That's why you have water.
Exactly.
Usually we don't grant water privileges.
Wow. Okay. So I'm special. So I guess it would be too much to ask for the throat coat tea.
Right. Yeah. That's like we have a full selection of green teas downstairs, but therefore, even more elevated.
Oh, okay.
Maybe the raspberry green tea,
Maybe someday I'll get there.
Okay. But yes, this has been a pretty involved process. I mean, it's only been 2 years since the Dobbs decision. Your book chronicles the first year after Dobbs. You spent time as a Nieman Fellow up at Harvard working on the book. You've since been editing and finishing. Meanwhile, desperately trying not to worry too much about all the stuff that's happened since then, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is
I rewrote the afterword completely 3 or 4 times because stuff keeps happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was, and as you said, I was advised to just keep in mind as I'm reading the advanced copy that you have some 500 edits.
No, it's more than 700 now, actually. So the advanced reader copy is already a couple months old. And so I've since made, I would say in the low 700s of changes to what you have in your hand. Well,
I guess it just begs for a sequel. I mean, I should be used to this with going to film festivals and so forth, because a lot of times a film that appears at a festival is not in its final form. The director takes into account the reaction and focus and so forth. So no, but this has been a long process, and September 10th it will be out, so people can pre-order the book.
It's available
through Bloomsbury Publishing.
Yes, and it's anywhere you buy books, really.
Okay, and also hardcover too. Hardcover. I mean, online or not online, but the digital version and the audiobook.
Correct.
All right, shameless plug done there. I should mention for those of you who are watching this podcast on YouTube, this is a little different. We usually don't have the guest in the glass cage of emotion here at Roll Call in the newsroom, surrounded by the headlines of the past. But when people are in town, we did this with Niels Lesniewski before he went to Beijing recently, just to sort of wrap up some of the stuff that he was working on. And I kind of like this. This is I'll just do nice comfy couch. It's like.
I mean, I was kind of in it for the throat coat tea, so if it's not available, I might just head home.
Well, we'll try to wrap this up as soon as possible then. So, one of the things I remember when you were at the early stages of working on this book, that you mentioned that the politics of this have been remarkably consistent for years.
Yeah.
Using it as a wedge issue in politics is a fairly recent thing at least in the last for generational politics.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So until the 80s, abortion really wasn't a political issue that aligned with our parties the way it does now. That didn't start to become the case until it was in the 80s, the kind of evangelicals combined with Catholics to be this new kind of power block in the Republican Party. This was a concerted thing. It didn't just happen. It happened during Ronald Reagan's presidency, but there were architects behind the scenes who were kind of using this. And actually, it's actually related to school segregation no longer being kind of a palatable issue in politics. And that's kind of previously what they'd hoped to motivate evangelicals with. And so when that was no longer something that the Republican Party really wanted to openly embrace, they started looking for a new issue to kind of create a new block of voters, and it became abortion. And so evangelicals were kind of like a political non-factor before this point in time. They got brought into the fold in the Republican Party. And, you started to see the Republican Party shift first. And so by the, early 90s, certainly by the mid to late 90s, pretty much if you were a Republican, you opposed abortion rights for the most part. Now, we still have like 2 holdouts in the Senate. And every now and then somebody at the state level, a governor in particular, in some cases. But pretty much if you're a Republican, you oppose abortion. Now, the Democratic Party was a little bit slower to shift and only started doing so in the late 90s into the 2000s even. One of the things that Planned Parenthood did under the leadership of Richards was to really kind of make it an issue for Democrats the same way it was for Republicans. But still to this day, you have a significant portion of voters whose beliefs on abortion do not align with their political party, particularly on the Republican side.
Yeah. And also we should note that it wasn't, it wasn't so much that it started at the Republican Party level. The Republican Party sort of like followed some of the advocates, in particular people like Paul Weyrich,
yes,
in the 70s and 80s, who had been developing the strategy and saw it as an issue that had some real currency. And we may have even talked about this in a previous podcast that we did together about like just to demonstrate the non-salience of the abortion issue for a broad sector of the electorate, and particularly in Congress. When John Paul Stevens, when he was nominated, though, by a Republican president for a vacancy on the Supreme Court, he was not asked about Roe versus Wade.
Yeah. I mean, this was not a question that was asked until well into my lifetime.
Yeah. It just was not an issue for a long time. And then all of a sudden this becomes what animates both significant blocks of the of both parties. It was nominated by Ford. I was right. Yeah. I shouldn't have doubted myself.
Yeah. So you don't doubt yourself. Just go with it.
Real-time fact checking. So, and you're right. I mean, the Democrats, they had, at the congressional level, I remember, Bart Stupak, a former, member of Congress, Democrat from Michigan. He was during the debate over the Affordable Care Act, he wanted to, sort of iron out some abortion related issues, but like he's kind of the exception. And now really the only significant congressional Democrat, I would say, who is opposed to abortion is Henry Cuellar, Democrat from Texas. But it's just the great sort, if you will, has happened.
I would say Senator Manchin, although he recently switched parties, has also not been supportive of abortion rights across the board.
Well, not switch parties, just went the independent route entirely. So now we have 4 independents in the Senate, in Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, Bernie Sanders, and Angus King. By the way, I was going through last week when we were putting together a roll call. We were sort of putting together some of the print, and we noticed that the last time, or the first time, an attorney general was held in contempt of Congress, it was also on the day of a congressional baseball game, as it was last week. And so I pulled up a version of roll call to just look at what was happening that day. It was also the day that the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act, or the first big challenge to it then. But flipping through the interior pages, there was a story about Angus King, how Republicans were hopeful that Angus King would caucus with them.
And LOL.
Yeah. No. The answer.
How did that pan out
for them? Just, how things, seem at one point and then just become like, it's hard to think of Bernie Sanders and Angus King as anything but Democrats, even though they are technically independents. So let's, again, it is interesting that as you said, the parties have sorted themselves out. The public, though, has
public
not.
is not. The public is, there has been majority support for some access to legal abortion since Roe was decided. And, when you look at polling, the wording of the questions makes a lot of difference, just like in all polling, but especially for issues like abortion. But there's been a majority that at least supports some access. That number just continues to grow as you layer in things like, should people be able to get an abortion if it's threatening their health? Even more people say yes. If their life is threatened, a lot of people say yes. Cases of rape and incest, strong majorities for abortion rates in those cases. Now, if you start going the other way in terms of like setting kind of a cutoff, there is a greater comfort among the electorate with like cutting it off at 15 weeks, but also having those other exceptions, like for the life or for health or for rape or incest. Because, and that's why these bans that are related to like weeks gestation, that's why they exist, because they're trying to figure out kind of that sweet spot of when are people okay with this and how far can we push it until they're no longer okay with it. But a strong majority overall, if you ask the question along the lines of, do you support some or all access to legal abortion? The answer from the strong majority of the American public is yes.
And so that brings me to the next sort of thing I want to talk about, which is we have this incredibly close election cycle that we're in the middle of. The national polls show Donald Trump and Joe Biden in a very, very close race, usually within the error margin. Gets a little more specific and when you go to each individual swing state, but most of them, except for a few outliers, indicate that there are enough states within the margin of error that it's a toss-up right now. Same thing with the House. The Republicans have a 5-seat majority, or actually, what is it right
Actually,
now?
I was going to say, you might want to check today because it could have changed on the holiday yesterday.
Depending on who is sworn in or not sworn in and special elections and so forth. But it is a handful, say. And this could come down to a few races in like New York or California, like in areas, suburban areas that tend to go back and forth in close elections or in wave elections. And then the Senate is as close as it can get. Mm-hmm. Probably Republicans have the edge at this point to be in the majority, but it is going to come down to who wins the presidency, most likely, and whether like the Democrats, some incumbent Democrats who have shown an ability to win close races,
pull it out.
Yeah. And the thing that I'm curious about, you only have so much time.
Correct.
As we all do.
And there are 535 of them.
Right. Well, and, don't leave out the delegates. Come on. And the governors. But what's the handful of races that you're looking at specifically in the House and Senate where you think that this abortion rights could definitely be an issue that pulls it one way or the other in very close?
Yeah. House side, I'm looking at either the places you mentioned because they have a history of kind of flipping back and forth. So those races
Orange County,
in Orange
California,
County,
and the Hudson Valley, and
exactly.
New York,
and so it's like those are the three areas I'm looking at. There are actually a lot of women in those seats. There are actually a lot of Republican women, especially in the Orange County seats. And so I'm interested to kind of see what those voters do. And I do think it's complicated to message kind of on abortion rights in California, because I think that some voters there feel so insulated from what's happening in the country generally, but also specifically related to abortion. I mean, they're truly living in a different world than Arizona or any state in the South at this point. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's going to come down to how much do you care about other people who live in other states and whether they have the same rights as you? Because the reality is, I don't think that either party is going to get enough seats to pass a federal abortion ban via legislation. Mm-hmm. And we can talk in a minute because there's about other ways that a federal abortion ban could be accomplished without legislation. But, if you are a Republican in a swing area, you can say with some confidence, electing me is not going to lead to a national abortion ban because I'm not going to vote for that because we don't even have the numbers for it anyway. And that's, on its face true. Now, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't support some other things that would constrict access or, indirectly support an administration that could, ban abortion in other ways. Now, there's other states that I think could be really interesting because of abortion rights on the ground there specifically. So some of these close races in the Pennsylvania suburbs I'm watching, even some in Florida, because Florida just enacted its really restrictive 6-week ban. While I think statewide that state is very difficult for Democrats, I don't think we should rule out them, winning some House seats there potentially, depending on what's going on there, simply because that ban is keeping abortion in the news, and they're also aiming to have a ballot measure related to abortion. Right. And so that's going to be like an issue that is going to be in the headlines in the state of Florida from now until November.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to the ballot measures in a bit, because I feel like that is something that can also affect some of these federal races. But in specifically in the Senate, I mean, it seems like if every race were to kind of go where it is leaning right now, it would come down to who wins in Montana and who wins in Ohio. And you've got two Democrats running for re-election, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, John Tester in Montana, who have won in they won in a wave election in 2006, and they've kind of kept going. They've managed to hold serve, if you will, as their states became more Republican. And those are definitely toss-up races. I mean, Ohio does not have a ballot measure. Montana might. It's too early to tell right now. They might have a ballot measure on abortion. But how much are you paying attention to those races? I know that they're, again, you only have so much time. But
I mean, I'm paying a lot of attention to them because they're very important. But I think it's important to note and remember and realize that a ballot measure, a voter voting via ballot measure to protect abortion rights, does not equal I'm going to vote for the Democrats in races. Now, Ohio doesn't have a ballot measure. I'm an Ohioan, so I track Ohio really closely, grew up there. They already passed their ballot measure on an off year last year. So that is now codified in the Ohio Constitution, a right to abortion access. Now, I would expect the Ohio State House to try and undo that to the extent they can. They tried to make it harder for them to even pass that ballot measure, and kind of like an anti-democratic end run around the entire process. They brought back a special election to do it. And I think in Ohio, if any Democrat can win a statewide Senate race, it is Sherrod Brown. That doesn't mean, however, that he will win. And I think if he doesn't win, Ohio just needs to be kind of like removed as any sort of possibility potentially for Democrats in the near future. Because I think if anyone can win, he can. And if he can't, then it's going to be hard for anyone. Montana, I've said for a while, Democrats should be studying how John Tester continues to win in Montana. Yeah. And they probably are, and we just don't hear about it that much. But like the fact that he has hung on for as long as he can is somewhat remarkable to me. And you're right, they are thinking of floating a ballot measure there. There could also be a ballot measure in Florida, as I just discussed. But like I know in Florida and some other places, the advocacy groups working on these ballot measures, sometimes when say, I don't know, a president or a politician and their campaign will reach out and say, like, we want to be a part of this. They're kind of like, we're good. Yeah. Because they know that in a state like Montana or in a state like Florida or in a state like Ohio, they need not just a couple of Republicans to get it to pass. They need a lot of Republicans to get it to pass. And they don't want to muck up their own chances by tying it to a specific party, because a lot of what is happening right now in this country, I believe, is we're starting to see the very beginning of a voter backlash to things that don't represent their interests that are being passed. And so this is their way to directly do that. So for people who are kind of disillusioned with the two political parties, who kind of are throwing up their hands, I'm sick of Washington, I'm sick of all this partisanship, the last thing you want, if you're one of the advocacy groups working on these ballot measures, is to tie it to one party or the other.
Right. It's so easy to caricature like, oh, all this out-of-state money is coming, trying to tell Montanans what to do, or so forth. I mean, one race also that I know you've covered, or at least you've covered one of the principles quite closely, is Arizona, my home state. And Carrie Lake is favored to win the Republican nomination. She has sort of seemingly fallen a little out of favor with the powers that be in Washington and possibly with Donald Trump. Right now, I think most, political handicappers see that Ruben Gallego, who's the likely Democratic nominee, has an edge. But it's also Arizona, and it's still a long ways out.
Yeah.
Arizona will have a ballot measure too.
Yes.
And it's interesting to me too that like we're seeing, to your point about how just because somebody says, yes, I want to protect abortion rights in the state doesn't mean I'm just automatically going to vote for Joe Biden.
Exactly.
Or Ruben Gallego or John Tester or Sherrod Brown. But we're seeing this phenomena where things like the ballot measures have overwhelming support. Like I saw this, I think it was an Emerson College poll, that just came out that said, 56% of Arizonans would vote yes to protect abortion rights. So, if this ballot measure gets in, and that Gallego, at least at this point, is outperforming Biden by like a lot. And we see this in Nevada too. Jackie Rosen is outperforming Biden by a lot. And so you could see this weird dynamic where abortion rights succeeds, the Democratic nominees for the Senate, and some House members like win, and then the top of the ticket does not.
I'm absolutely tracking a reverse coattails effect this election cycle. It's not something I've had the time to delve into yet in that from that angle, but I absolutely think, especially with young voters, with some of these slices of the electorate that are just feeling like very disillusioned and disengaged and feeling like they aren't presented with many options that they're excited about at the top of the ticket. I think not only Senate races, House races, state House races, local races, like you could see many people down ballot outperform the people as you get farther and further up the ballot, simply because I think that voters, there's like a not insignificant percentage of voters right now who are feeling pretty fed up with kind of the status quo kind of at the top and how the federal government and federal elections are going. And,
another dynamic that's happening too is that the Biden-Harris ticket is talking about abortion rights a lot. Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, is not. And he is, and he doesn't want to talk about it. He has advised his Republican allies in the House and Senate also to talk about it the right way.
No, it was talk correctly.
Talk correctly, whatever that means.
Which is not at all.
Again, this is a man who, as president, nominated and got confirmed 3 Supreme Court justices, all of whom voted to overturn versus Wade in Dobbs. And this is something that he said he would do in the 2016 election, and he did it.
Yes.
And now he is like, this might not be so good. And I think that it is so hard to talk, about presidential dynamics without the some of the normal tropes. But one thing that Trump knows, he is smart enough to know this is not a good issue for him, and just is not discussing it.
I mean, Trump is a very astute politician, no matter what you think of the man or his policies. And he is good at kind of like the grassroots. He's good at resonating with groups of people. There's a reason why people love to go to his rallies. Like they can be fun. And they feel like they really connect with him. He's very good. He's a very good retail politician in that way. He knows this is not a winning issue for them. He's teased announcements on abortion generally, medication abortion specifically, contraception at several times, including in a Time magazine interview about a month ago. I'm waiting for the announcements. Former President Trump, if you'd like to put them out, I'm all ears. We have yet to get them. So that leaves us to kind of look at, okay, well, what are the people around him suggesting? Because he's not talking about it and he won't commit to anything. So if you look at like what Project 2025 says about abortion,
this is the activist, heritage, the combination of heritage action folks and other sort of people in the Trump orbit saying this is what a Trump administration will look like. And they say
the next conservative administration, which given the year would indicate Donald Trump.
Right. And the Trump campaign has said like this is not an official document, but let's be honest. Yeah. This is populated by his folks.
Yes, it's the closest thing we're probably going to see to a policy platform. Because he doesn't put one out. He barely put one out in 2016 when he was running, and he didn't even have a legislative record then.
We didn't even get a new Republican platform in 2020. I'm curious about whether we'll get another platform or whether it'll still make references to Barack Obama.
Yeah, I mean, it could. So, like, if you look at Project 2025, it says very definitively kind of what their plans are for the next administration. It is have the Food and Drug Administration undo the 2000 approval of mifepristone, which is one of the 2 drugs used for medication abortions. Medication abortions are now account for 60-ish% of abortions in this country. It's a top priority to get rid of, mifepristone from the anti-abortion movement. That is in Project 2025. It suggests how they could use the Justice Department to go after abortion providers, potentially, even farther than the providers, to kind of restrict abortion and the people who are able to get and have an abortion. It talks about reclassifying drugs, which states are already doing. So there is a concerted effort, in Project 2025 in terms of how policies would be implemented from a future administration. There's also an effort afoot to kind of redefine using things not based in medical science, contraception, abortion, and things, various terms related to reproductive care. So what we're seeing in terms of there was the contraception bill a couple weeks ago that failed in Congress. Only 2 Republicans supported it in the Senate, and I don't think any in the House.
And then the IVF,
and IVF and actually the argument and the debate over IVF is another example. Not only are anti-abortion groups and the Republicans with which they're aligned trying to redefine emergency contraception, for starters, as an abortifacient. It is not. It does not cause an abortion. They believe, or they say it does. And so they're trying to get that reclassified as abortion. They are not only trying to redefine what's an abortion, they're actually trying to redefine kind of when conception begins. So they're getting very down into the nitty gritty. And that's important because it all feeds into kind of the fetal personhood argument that they're trying to establish, that all fetuses from the moment of conception have rights just like you or I would have. And, so if you can move that goalpost up, closer and closer to the minute after, 2 people have intercourse and a baby is started, that kind of helps their overall goal to end abortion in the country.
Right. And we saw, there were a lot of steps that went on in the country to narrow abortion access that we saw leading up to the Dobbs decision, such as requiring that an abortion clinic have, surgery ready, hallways and things like that. And so it's not that there isn't this hasn't been done before,
And those are called trap laws, targeted regulation of abortion providers. It was happening all over, kind of in red states for the past 20, 30 years. And so when someone like Trump, a candidate who's the de facto nominee for Republicans for president, he's always, he has a history of kind of conflating things and mixing things up. But when it comes to abortion, that becomes really important because is he conflating Plan B with abortion, or did he just misspeak? Because if he misspoke, that's one thing, but conflating the two is actually a strategy from the anti-abortion movement. And so that then feeds into their strategy.
Are you saying words are important?
I am saying words and language are very important.
I just want to mention a couple other areas where the abortion rights will be on the ballot. Maryland, which, a few months ago we would have said so, but with Larry Hogan, the Republican nominee for Senate, making it at least a potentially competitive race, that's something that could affect the outcome in his race against Angela Alsobrooks in Maryland. And then in New York also, again, there are all these competitive House races, particularly in Long Island and the Hudson Valley. And that, even though a lot of the members are supportive of abortion rights, particularly in New York, who knows how it may, come out. It may not at all, because we've already discussed that, but it's just there are the abortion rights groups are doing all they can to keep this up front of mind for people, because if it's not a priority issue, like say the economy or immigration or crime, then it, they miss perhaps a chance to make this a forefront. And then, in a couple of years, you get another decision, another Supreme Court, another. Well,
spoiler alert. So when I finally settled on an afterword for my book, it was, so one of my main settings was Phoenix, Arizona, and Jason's an Arizonan, so
Phoenix born.
He knows I love Arizona politics, and I was following a clinic out there run by a doctor named Gabrielle Goodrick, and we were talking. So like, I thought, Arizona, because my other main setting is Alabama, would kind of be like the safer of the two when I finished the main manuscript. And then we got the, pre-Civil War ban come back from that state Supreme Court. And so I talked to her shortly after that, and then they were able to, repeal that. There might still be a time where it briefly goes into effect. And I said, are you worried at all that now that this has been repealed, there will be less of an incentive for voters to put this into the state constitution? So right now, Arizona has a 15-week ban, which is kind of at that point where people start to say, okay, I'm okay with the 15-week ban. Like, that's enough time, especially if there are exceptions for health and stuff like that, because for those of you who have not followed a pregnancy, you often don't find out about pretty serious medical issues with your fetus until the anatomy scan, which is like 19 or 20 weeks usually. So as long as there's exceptions for that, voters are kind of like, okay, I can deal with 15 weeks. So I asked her, are you at all worried that this pre-Civil War ban, now that it's been, dispensed with, they might just be like, we're okay with this 15-week thing. We don't need to add it to the Constitution. And she was like, well, look what happens every time we think that the goalpost is done moving. It continues to move. And so she was saying it's 15 weeks now. But if people, send a bunch of Republicans back to the state house and we get a Republican governor in a couple of years, right now it's a Democrat, but she only won by like 0.6 points, I think. It was like hundreds of votes, not thousands. She was like, look, they'll move it up. They'll move it up to 12 weeks. They'll move it up to 6 weeks. And then before you know it, like there will be another ban. So full ban. So she was saying like, voters are smart enough to realize this at this point after watching for 2 years what's happened across this country. And so she doesn't think that will be a reason to not back Arizona's ballot measure. Or in places like Nevada, where, it's already in the Nevada Constitution, but like people could still, I guess what I'm trying to say is advocates don't think that this right is safe anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you live in a blue state. And so if you care about abortion rights, you need to be very vigilant. You need to get out. You need to vote for these ballot measures is what they would say, because, don't kind of buy the line of thinking that we're not, the anti-side is not coming for this next thing.
Well, and this is the difference between having a right to something and it being subject to political, whims. So, I mean, states change, right?
Yes.
Like Ohio was previously a swing state.
I grew up in a different state than exists today.
California used to be won regularly by Republicans like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon. It is now it is so democratic. It's almost like, off the board. So things change politically. Sometimes they take a long time, but a right is just that. It's a right. You don't get to mess with it.
Well, and I will say it's much harder, even at the state level, to remove something from the Constitution than to add a right. So once something is in there, it's going to be very hard, very difficult to get rid of it. Right. That's why some of these state legislatures are trying to make it harder to get things passed via ballot measure, because they know that once it's in there, it's there to stay probably. And so that you're right, like a legislation, law via legislation is very different than a right guaranteed by your state or federal constitution.
Amanda, one more shameless book plug. You Must Stand Up comes out September 10th. You'll wrap up the voice actor thing, in the next couple of days. I hope that this podcast didn't hamper your ability to finish that.
I'm going to go find some throat coat tea.
Okay. But thank you again for coming back on Political Theater. I think this is the first time you've been in the roll call newsroom since it moved.
It is.
Back in the day when you were with roll call at 77K. So welcome back.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening or watching this podcast. Remember to subscribe to us, watch us on YouTube, get our newsletter, all that kind of good stuff. Thanks again.